I have avoided in this whole series of lessons of just doing a slideshow of places we went. And that's kind of what tonight is a little bit of a slideshow. I tried to make some connections biblically in a couple of ways, I guess just to justify in my own mind since it is a Bible class. But Istanbul, it is a very important city in the world, and it would have had a major impact in the first century, with those first century Christians. We don't read anything in Scripture about this part of the world at that time. At that time, it would have been known as Byzantium. And what's that? Byzantium. Istanbul, it's a huge city. Kind of put, again, some of the geography to it. Greece and Turkey come together, but right here is a strait that connects the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, or actually the Aegean Sea, and that strait is the line right here between Asia and Europe. Istanbul lies right on that line. And so it's actually a city of about 16 million people. And as you can see, part of the city is in Europe, part of it is in Asia. There's a few bridges that go across the strait there. The Bosphorus Strait, what it's referred to. But this we saw in Corinth, with that one little strip of land where they would bring the goods through, how important that was. You can imagine how important this little strip of land right here is. Same thing. All of the goods coming from the Black Sea and those places to the north coming down would have all come through here. And so it made this also a very, very important city even in ancient times. Byzantium was founded in the 7th century BC by the Greeks. So we put a little biblical timeline with that. 7th century BC. They built this city, as you notice, it is on here's Greece, so it's on the very east side, one of the only access points to get into Greece from that direction. And so they were building it as fortification because there was an empire that was growing in the east that was getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. And we read about that empire in the Scripture. That would be the Assyrian Empire. And so as they're getting bigger and stronger, the city of Byzantium is built up to try to protect that eastern front of their country, of their land. And so biblically, this lines up with what we read in about 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19. So we have Hezekiah, king of Judah. That'd be the time of when King Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, came and surrounded the city of Jerusalem. When Hezekiah prayed, and God ended up destroying the entire Assyrian army overnight. And so this would put us in the timeline of about the prophet Isaiah. All of that's going on in the Bible, while up here in the north, we've got the Greeks building a city right here on this it's not an isthmus because it has the strait that goes through it that breaks it apart. So I guess they're two peninsulas is what they are. But it remained Byzantium, called Byzantium, for nearly 1,000 years. The Roman Emperor Constantine, we've talked about him a lot as we've looked at all these different churches of Asia and everything. Constantine was the emperor that was the first Roman emperor to be converted to Christianity. And so he was converted in 313 AD, and he made the decision to make Byzantium his capital city of the entire Roman Empire instead of Rome. And so he moved the capital city from Rome over to Byzantium. And in doing so, he renamed the city Constantinople, named it after himself. And so in 330 AD, he renamed the city, which also lasted. It was called Constantinople for about another 1,000 years. And we just throw around these numbers, 1,000 years. We think for us here in the U.S., that's a long time. Like I said, over there, 1,000 years is, it's not that old. I mean, it's not that long for them.
Steve, let's put it in perspective. If a person lives a good long life, they'll live to be 100.
Yeah.
So if this 100-year-old man passes something to a child who's newborn that year, 10 times,
Yeah.
1,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah. You think about the number of generations, it would probably be
More generations than that.
yeah, probably 20 generations or more, 15 to 20 generations that would take that long. You know, it's a long time. So it stayed Constantinople for a long, long time. Even after the Roman Empire was gone, it was still Constantinople. But then in 1453 AD, so Columbus was 1492. So in 1453, the Ottoman Empire began to make its way conquering across the land. The Ottoman Empire, those are the Muslims, as they began to conquer all of that part of the country, or all of that part of the world. And actually, the Ottoman Empire ended up being bigger than the Roman Empire was at one point. They eventually conquered the city of Constantinople. And over time, it didn't happen immediately. Over time, the name was officially changed to Istanbul. It wasn't actually changed until after World War I. So there's a lot of history that goes behind that, and it's really cool history if you're into that kind of stuff. But I won't bore you with all of that tonight. So there is a lot of history that surrounds this incredible city. And in this city, what I want to do, I'm just going to show some of the highlight points of places that we went and saw. One of the first things, I did throw this up there. In Istanbul, this is the old city. So there are things right here, the Hippodrome that we're going to see in just a moment. This is the Blue Mosque. This is the Hagia Sophia. It originally was it was a church building that was built, a cathedral that was built by, I've got his name here in a little bit. And so this was the main part, the Grand Bazaar. This was the main part of the old city. And so just to get an idea of kind of where things are as we look at them, so you have that kind of an idea. But the Hippodrome, this is one of the things I thought was going to be the most intriguing thing to me because of some of the history behind it. When Emperor Constantine moved the Roman capital to Constantinople, one of the first things he did was had this hippodrome built, and that was built in about 330 AD. Now, this is obviously a reconstruction, a illustration. What they've done, they took a picture of the real city, modern day city of Istanbul, and they superimposed the size and what the hippodrome would have been like even in ancient times. The modern day things, and we're going to see these here in a little bit. This is the Blue Mosque. This is the Hagia Sophia. And we'll get closer look at those in a minute. And you can see just how incredible this thing was. Chariot races, other types of competitions would have been done here. And in Rome, they had brought back a massive obelisk from Egypt, which I believe is still there, to show off their conquest of northern Africa. Well, when Constantine moved the capital over to Constantinople, he could have just brought that obelisk with him and had it hauled over. I mean, they moved it all the way from Africa to Italy. They could have just moved it over here to this location. But oh no, Constantine wasn't going to have that. As a matter of fact, he wanted to do one better. And so he went back to Africa, or he had people go back to Africa for him, to find a bigger obelisk and to bring it back. And so he did that. This is modern day. We're standing in the middle of what was the Hippodrome. These two obelisks that are standing there now are still mark the location of the center of the Hippodrome. This obelisk was created by an Egyptian pharaoh in about 1300 BC. And it commemorated one of his great military victories. 1300 BC. So now we're talking about the time of the judges. This is a couple hundred years after Moses and the Israelites were in Egypt. And so it kind of give a biblical timeline as to when this obelisk was made. So not too long after Moses and the Israelites left Egypt, 200 years, this thing was created. It originally was 30 meters tall. It's about 100 feet, 10 stories tall. But in transport from Egypt over here to Constantinople, it broke. And so the small bottom part, they just threw off into the sea. And the top of it, which still is about 65 feet tall, it was kept and erected here in the center of the Hippodrome in 390 AD. And at the base of this, and what's interesting, the street level here in modern day, actually when you go all the way down to the bottom of this hole, you can see the pavement, the paving stones that were the original ground level back in the day. And so they've excavated all the way down. What this is showing, I don't know if I have his name down here. I don't. He was another emperor of Rome who, it shows him and his family. It's actually his two sons and his wife. And they are sitting. I have pictures, but I don't have them up here tonight. All four sides show different things going on as events taking place in the Hippodrome. And so here's one, he's sitting in his box seat at the Hippodrome, and there are servants of some kind coming and bringing him offerings, paying homage to him. And so it's just a very intricately carved base for this whole thing. They were very, very proud of themselves and let everybody know it. I don't know if you remember when we talked about the city of Delphi or Delphi. There was this bronze spiraled serpent that was standing next to the temple of Apollo. And I mentioned then that the one in Delphi was a replica. So this is the one in Delphi. This is a replica because the original was taken and was erected back in the center of the Hippodrome in Constantinople. And so this is the original one that once was in Delphi. And so it was just kind of an interesting, we saw this first before we went to Delphi, so I didn't think it was any big deal. I didn't even think it was that important. And then we get to Delphi and I was like, oh, you're telling me I should have learned more about this earlier in the trip. One of the most massive things that we saw was what is known as Hagia Sophia. There were multiple cathedrals or church buildings that were built by the Romans. There was I can't remember the others now. This is Sophia is wisdom. There was another one that was for peace. There was another one that was for, I think there were 4 of them in different places. This was the holy place of peace. and it's not far from the Hippodrome. It was at one time, when it was originally built, the largest structure ever built in the world. And it was built in 537 AD. It was Emperor Justinian who built Hagia Sophia. A little bit more history connected with this, help you understand what you see on the inside a little bit. When the Ottoman Empire, when they were conquering their way through the Roman Empire, in 1453, Constantinople, it was the last Roman city standing. And that was because it was so well fortified. And it had these massive walls that were built all the way around the city. And they were supposedly indestructible. Of course, we know what happens to things when they say they're indestructible. They usually hit icebergs and sink to the bottom of the ocean. But when the Muslim Sultan, his name was Mehmet II, when he came to besiege the city, they tried and tried and tried to get through the walls, and they couldn't. So he asked for something to be built unlike anything that had ever been built before. He asked for a massive cannon to be built, and it has still been preserved. And this cannon could fire a 600-pound stone up to 1 mile. And this was before Columbus, 1453. The problem was that it took them about 3 hours to reload the cannon. But with patience and one shot after another, they ultimately brought down the walls of Constantinople. There are a lot of, you can Google this, there are a lot of paintings, illustrations of the walls of Constantinople being blown apart. So Sultan Mehmet, he immediately had Hagia Sophia converted into a mosque. Remember, they're the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire coming in. And so he told his people that he wanted every single Christian image, every single Christian icon plastered over and removed before he entered into the city, because he was going to worship Allah as soon as he arrived. So in just a matter of a few days, this massive building, they completely plastered over everything. And then over the next several years, they began to paint and they began to decorate it into the Muslim mosque that it is today. It was just a museum for several years, and just a few years ago, they opened it back up again as an actual practicing mosque there in that area. But over time, in some places, some of the plaster began to crumble, and it began to reveal the artwork that had originally existed when Hagia Sophia was built nearly 1,000 years before. And so there are a lot of things here. This is, you remember this symbol? We saw it in several places. That was an emblem that Christians used to communicate to other Christians during the Roman persecution. That this place of business, sometimes we saw it carved into a stone on the ground, or this emblem is found all over these paintings. And this was actually the first one we saw. This was only the second day of the trip when we were here. And he pointed this out, and he said, remember this, you're going to see this a lot on this trip. And that's what we saw in all those different places. But this would have been things that were painted back in, what did I say, 537 AD. You can see some of those. And just the work that they did is really incredible to see the artwork. And they just plastered over it and did their own thing. There's a lot of evidence of the Muslims coming in on both sides of this stone, and this thing stood about this tall. so it's pretty big. But on both sides, these were crosses, and you see how they carved the top of them off, chiseled them off so that it removed the crosses. There were a lot of places like this where there probably was a gold or a silver cross that was inlaid into the stone. Those were all removed and pulled out. Now, if you ask the Turkish people, they will tell you that when the Christians came back with the Crusades, that the Christians were the ones that did all of this damage. But there is ample evidence that this damage was done way before the Crusades. So it's interesting to hear the Greeks and the Greeks and the Turks and all of the different history that they tell. It's a completely different history book. The Blue Mosque, this was just interesting. I'd never been in a mosque before. And it is very interesting when you are in a Muslim country going into a mosque. The first night we stayed in a hotel that was right across the street from a mosque. As soon as we stepped off of the bus, it was the time for the evening prayer that they do, and the guy singing from the minarets, and it kind of put a chill down your spine. But the Blue Mosque in 1617, so this is quite a bit later, the Ottoman Sultan at the time decided to build one of the largest mosques in the world right there next to Hagia Sophia. Today, this is commonly known as the Blue Mosque because of more than 200,000 hand-painted tiles that give it a bluish turquoise color. Now, I put that picture in there because we thought it was kind of cool. This is the main gate going in. You notice the chains, the way that you have any idea why those chains would be there like that? It's not going to keep any people out. That would keep you from riding a horse into the mosque. And so those chains have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've left them there. But that was the reason for that kind of a chain. So this is pretty incredible. You can get into some of the areas where it was better lit. Took some pictures. You see the artwork. Those are all individual tiles. It's not painted on black plaster. They're individual tiles. I said almost 250,000 of these tiles. As a matter of fact, this is where the color turquoise got its name, because of this very specific color that was used here and throughout the country of Turkey. Turquoise, Turkey, and it was because of this, and so you can imagine they sell these tiles with this hand painted all over the place. I think that's all I've got of that. The Basilica Cistern was a pretty cool place. One of the problems that Istanbul had was that there were no freshwater rivers flowing anywhere nearby. Because of this, the Romans did what Romans do. What do Romans do when there's not any water nearby? They build an aqueduct. And so this massive aqueduct system that transported water over 75 miles to the city of Istanbul, or Constantinople at the time. Over the years, archaeologists have discovered over 200 underground cisterns throughout the city of Istanbul that were used to store water. And they keep finding more and more. When they do excavations and things, they run into something, they go, oh, we found another water cistern. They're all over the place because they had to store a lot of water. Nowadays, we have cisterns, but they're way up in the sky in a water tower. In 541, at the same time he was building Hagia Sophia, Emperor Justinian, he used more than 7,000 slaves to build a massive cistern that sat underneath some of the city's most important political buildings, under the basilica. And so that's why it's known as the Basilica Cistern. This cistern is said to be able to hold almost 24 million gallons of water. And of course they have it lit up and the lights change colors and all that kind of thing and make it a pretty cool. They use it now as a museum. They actually have art pieces that are sitting all around you can go around and look at. But it was built with all of these Greek columns. that had been repurposed. And there are some really interesting ones. This is one that it was really the most decorative one in the whole place. But it was one that they found that matched 6 other columns that were used in one of the temples to one of the Greek gods that they have found. And then they noticed that this one is the exact same size and the exact same design carved into it as those. And so they know that it was most likely brought from there. At the base of 2 of the columns, there are stones that they would repurpose from other things. And there's 2 of them that had the head of Medusa. And one of them was placed upside down. The other one was placed on its side. And it's said that they did this to keep the curse of Medusa from having any kind of an influence over them while they were building and using the cistern. This was a massive, big underground place. As a matter of fact, it's been used in some movies. There was a James Bond movie that this was in. There's been some others that they've used this in as well. From there, we went. This was one day. This was a long day. This was day 1, really, of our tour, and I started wondering if I was going to make it through the rest of the trip. This is where I've mentioned several times where people would just throw their junk. This is on the road to the museum in Istanbul. And this is stuff that people, as they're doing construction in their backyard or things, they find something and they don't have any place to put it. So they just throw it over here on the side of the road going up to the museum. Hopefully the people in the museum can use it. And so there's just stuff all stacked up. Pieces of columns, sarcophagus. There's all kinds of stuff that's just stacked up all along the way. This is in the museum. This sarcophagus, as well as this one, they're dated to about 300 to 400 BC. And so very, very, very old, but they are incredibly beautiful. And the carvings, solid marble. It just, again, shows the wealth of many of the people at that time. What's that? Yeah, a sarcophagus. There would have been a body that would have been in that. And it's huge. You'd think they could put multiple bodies. I guess maybe they did, but usually I think they're just one that was put in there. There's an inscription on them that they tell you the name of the people and all that, who they were. Obviously, when we're going around, we've seen a lot of these in many of the cities that we've looked at, the statues of different people. And many of the statues didn't have heads. And so we just assume over the thousands of years, somebody got mad and went over and knocked the head off a statue. But that's actually not the case most of the time, because there are thousands of heads that are found by archaeologists all over the place. And the reason for that is they didn't have to recarve the whole thing. They could take one head off. If there's an emperor and he's wearing armor, they could just take his head off when the next emperor came in and put the new emperor's head on it. And or the family would do the same thing if it was a family statue, and so this was something that we saw all over the place. Yeah, he wasn't there very long. So you can imagine there's probably some sculptor that is saying, I just got started and he's already dead. I gotta do a new one. And he's the one that came up with the idea. What if I just do the head? So technology. But there's so much. I could show you so much more from the museum, but I won't spend that much time. The Grand Bazaar was really cool. Grand Bazaar is one of the last places we visited that day. We were exhausted. And the Grand Bazaar, this is one of the original gates going into the Grand Bazaar. It was built by the Ottomans, the Muslims, when they came and conquered the city. One of the very first things that was built there, because they were trying to create the largest marketplace in the world. And they succeeded. It is massive. Now, it had been destroyed more than a dozen times over the years by fires, until finally somebody got smart and said, no more open flames in the bazaar. Which, for a long time, that would have been hard because they didn't have electricity. But it spans, this is a view from overhead, it spans 61 city streets, and it's all completely covered with roof. It has over 4,000 shops inside. And so when you're walking, you can literally get lost. We may have literally gotten lost while we were walking around in this thing. And so when you walk through it, it is incredible, all the shops. There's not anything that I can imagine that you could not buy in this place. You see all the different food, there were clothes, there was pottery, there was an open market with fish, there was all kinds of things. Just an amazing, amazing place. And I didn't spend anything in this place. It was day 2 of the trip. I still had a long way to go. Then, of course, this is for Zephyr. A lot of the food. This is just Istanbul. And some of the places that we went into, this was a meal one of the days. We had a lot of kebabs. And you'll see here, as we go through these, the reason why I was not going to be stuck to my diet while we were on this trip. Some very neat, different places that we were able to eat at. And then a lot of the shops that you go through. And yeah, it was pastries and it was candies and it was all kinds of things, but they make everything out of pure ingredients, and so I justified that in being that it was better for me. You can just see row after row after row after shelf after shelf after shelf of stuff. And some of it I looked at and go, I don't think I want to put that in my mouth. Containers. These were full of some kind of liquid. And I'm not exactly sure what it was. All the different candies and nuts. And more of the same and different. Everything you can imagine. Well, spices, yeah. Spices, pistachios. They have pistachios all over the place. I didn't realize I liked pistachios until I was there, and now I love them. Dry fruit. You want soap? They got soap. This is where we brought back some. Sorry, they're gone. Turkish Delights. If you go down to Walmart and buy Turkish Delights, those are not Turkish Delights. They are melt in your mouth. I would go back just for those. These guys were there making them right there in front of us. That's a Turkish coffee. You have to ask Jenny about that. I did not try that. And so there were, when we went into the mosque, all the women had to wear a head covering at that time. But I put that up there last as a way just for us to say thank you again. It was you really who sent us and made all this possible for us to be able to go and do all this. And so we really appreciate that. I hope that what I was able to share gave you a little bit of an insight into that world and what we see more in detail, what we read in Scripture. And I can promise you there's more that will be coming in different lessons and things like that it literally was one of those life-changing events. And so we greatly appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that. So that's it.